Hey, have you ever felt that things were so bad that you had nowhere to go but up? Well, that is the story of my guest, Ted Lynch. Ted was in prison, and he said the Lord literally put him on his back so he could look up. Ted is a Nashville recording artist whose life has taken many twists and turns, to say the least. He was in very destructive relationships, including one with his father. Ted, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
Now, before we talk about how you ended up in prison, let's go back your childhood. You did believe in God?
Yeah, I went to church as a child and served on the altar, and I remember watching the priest, bless the communion. And I remember being on my knees, being a first server and ringing the bells, and I looked at him and I said to myself, I'd like to be a priest. And then my shoulders kind of shrunk, and my thought was, but I'd like to get married.
So you had a little dilemma right on there.
I did.
To talk about your family life, because a part of your story is a really rough relationship with your dad.
Yeah, I tell folks that I grew up in a home that went to church, but I didn't grow up in a Christian home. And, you can go to the garage and it doesn't make you a mechanic, and you can go to the hospital, it won't make you a nurse or doctor, and you can necessarily go to church and not be a Christian. Well, I didn't have, I had an interest in God, but I didn't have that relationship with God. And my dad was an alcoholic, and I was, I loved my dad. He was a picture of strength. I loved the smell of him. He had big hands, and, but my dad was a worker, and we didn't spend a lot of time with him unless we were piling wood or doing the garden or even haying or things like that. Anyhow, as things progressed, I found myself at the end of his knuckles and the end of his belt a lot, and I really began to resent him, and it just progressed from that. I started doing really bad in school, and that's where my life really spiraled. As I was older, I get into more like drugs and alcohol and things like that.
So things were not good on the home front. Was it anger that you had inside, that that you started pursuing drugs, you got into trouble, violence, those kinds of things?
I think I felt lonely, even though there were 6 siblings, and I felt alone. I can't explain that totally, but yeah, and then this anger and this hardness towards my father took place. My heart became very calloused, and it just got to the point where I wasn't going to listen to him anymore, and I wouldn't listen to him. I just made a decision. I always tell people today that you need to be careful. If there's any voice, you need to be careful. What you listen to, it's your own. Mm-hmm. And I remember as a young man, a teenager, saying, nobody cares. Why should I?
So, you were believing a lie.
I was. That's a total lie. Because God cares, and Jesus cares, and people care. And but that really put me down the wrong road big time.
So you go down this road where you're into vandalism, violence, alcohol use. So what was it that actually finally landed you in prison?
Well, yeah, it started with, petty stuff, slashing tires and breaking things, and, I was fortunate. High-speed chase with the police. I was able to get away a lot and with things, and petty crimes, stealing at the mall. Anyways, when I went away to the community college in Woodstock, New Brunswick, I was a binge drinker. I didn't just drink that night. I get up the next day and I hit her again, and the next day after that. And
was this to dull the pain, Ted? Or?
I think so. Yeah, I didn't care if I lived or died. I really didn't. And I had 3 of my close friends were killed in one summer. Guys I went to the camp with, and guys that I partied with, and traveled the roads with. I was in Woodstock, as I mentioned, and I went to the bar, and it was probably the 3rd or 4th night that I was hitting her. I was a binge drinker, and I took every drug I had ever seen. And I was coming home from the bar, and I met this guy, or he was an acquaintance of an acquaintance. These people it wasn't necessarily my friends, but we decided to break into the college, and it wasn't the first time I broke into a place. But this time we set off the silent alarm, And the next morning after being arrested was probably about the worst day of my life. I woke up in a jail cell laying on a cement slab.
Okay, before we're going to take a break because we're going to pick it up as you're on this cement slab and what happens in that prison cell when we come back with Ted Lynch here on 100 Huntley Street.